Hey guys, I want to dive right into the content right after I introduce myself. Okay, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Eric Berg. I graduated 29 years ago as a chiropractor. I don't do chiropractic anymore. I specialize in nutrition, keto, and intermittent fasting. I had a clinic in Northern Virginia for over 29 years. I worked on 45,000 different people. So I had a chance to really work one-on-one with massive amount of people to figure things out, and that's what I do now is I share the results from the clinic on YouTube, and I do a lot of videos, and I do this full time. I also taught at Howard University as an associate professor in the health department, so I taught nutrition there. I also was the best-selling author for my one of my older books called The 7 Principles of Fat Burning, which has been majorly upgraded to the new body type guide, which I recommend. This is the one I recommend that you read, not the older version, because there's a lot of updates, okay? Probably 1,000 hours of work on updating that book. I also trained over 2,500 doctors over the last 10 years, and I certified them in my techniques. I also delivered over 4,900 seminars in my clinic around town and in pretty much all the governmental agencies in Washington, D.C. Presently, I have over 2,500 YouTube videos and over 155 million views, over 1 million subscribers. So my goal right now is to disseminate the truth about health. Personally, my story, real quick, I grew up in the Midwest. I was raised on typical diet, ate a lot of sugar, excessive amounts of sugar, and this went on and on and on up until I was probably in my late 20s. In fact, I don't think I even ever ate a vegetable until I was 21. I hated vegetables. I didn't eat them. The only thing green that I consumed was pistachio ice cream and lime green Jell-O. Okay, so I ate a lot of stuff. My grandmother was an amazing cook, and she would cook a lot of carbs, a lot of cakes, a ton of junk food, and I would consume not just a little bit, but a lot. This went on. I got into sports. Wrestling primarily, wrestled through junior high school and college. But what happened, I would go into the season undefeated and then barely make it through the end of the season because I was so tired because my diet was so terrible. I didn't know about nutrition. I had zero data on nutrition. Like, it was really bad. So I don't know how I survived the season, but I ended up just scraping through. So if you see some of my pictures that I'm presenting, you can see me looking very tired and very weak. So if you ever went through a wrestling practice, right, it's intense. But with all that fatigue, I do not know how I made it. I also then went into the military for about 5 years in reserves, and basically pushed myself through basic training, and again, barely made it through the PT test because the combination of stress, poor eating, lack of sleep, I had some serious blood sugar issues back then. I didn't know it until it finally caught up with me in my late 20s, to the point where I had almost like sand in my eyes. That was a blood sugar issue, dry eyes to the extreme, arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, massive blood sugar, mood disorder issues, insomnia. I had a lot of problems, okay? A lot of problems, to the point where I became very motivated to get well. So I'd be driving down the street to get help and see this little building over here. Oh, the health house. Oh, let me go there. Maybe they can help me. Come out with a bunch of pills. Oh, let me try this over here. This is a health food store. Let me get some more vitamins. Let me try this vitamin. I was reaching for straws, trying everything. I had a warehouse of vitamins, but I didn't know what I was doing. So it really didn't help until I stumbled on some information that was the right thing, that had to do with blood sugars and insulin, which then I started to change my diet, and I'll never forget this. I remember cutting out cereal for breakfast and having more protein, and I just like, oh my God, I feel so good. Like, my head felt so good, and I'm like, wow, this is really good. So I started to make little changes more and more. I went to a healthcare practitioner that found my liver was really bad, so I started working on that. And then I come home and I tell my wife, honey, I'm quitting the practice. I'm going into nutrition. She goes, what? I said, yeah, I no longer want to do, traditional chiropractic. I'm going to do nutrition. She goes, you don't know anything about it. I says, well, I'm going to learn. So I started to get everything I could, flying around the country, doing postgraduate seminars, getting training and certifications. But the real knowledge came from working one-on-one with so many people over the years. But I just had this intense interest to study obsessively, 24/7 weekends, and I never stopped. So I'm so interested in the body and how it works. I pretty much relearned everything that I learned from school, because in school they don't teach you how to apply it. And from that, came up with some great things that I'm going to share with you. Okay? So here's the problem. The current model of healthcare is that you have a symptom and you treat it, and then you manage it, and the symptom goes away, and you continue the medications, and then you just keep going. Okay? So it's basically manage care. Manage your symptoms. There's real little evaluation. There's basically just suppressing a symptom. And so all the while, the health really doesn't increase. So what's missing in healthcare is the health part. Because what happens, you don't actually lose weight and get healthy. You have to get healthy first before you lose weight. And getting healthy is not necessarily just about putting nutrients in the body. That's part of it. But it's all about getting rid of stuff that you don't need. Okay, we'll talk more about that as we go through this. But if you look around, the most common health problems out there nowadays, and I'm just going to list the most common ones: stubborn belly fat, like so many people have that. I mean, it's just everywhere. So that's one thing. That is a health problem. Fatigue. People are tired. They're tired mid-afternoon, like I was. They are tired after they eat. And then we have problems sleeping. They don't wake up in the morning, feel refreshed. They lost that vitality. They can't get the sleep. They're excessively thinking 24/7 when they're trying to sleep. They get up in the middle of the night. They have sleep apnea. They have a lot of sleep issues. And then you have all sorts of mood disorders, anxiety, depression, very common emotional roller coaster stuff. Memory loss. They go in a room, they can't quite remember why they went in there. Their tolerance for stress is low. People get on their nerves easily. I know that's hard to believe, right? But it's very, very common. So these are the common symptoms that most people have. But then it actually shifts to more and more issues that related to blood sugars, like cravings for carbs, can't go a long time without eating, urination at night, cravings for chocolate and chips and salt. So this is what happens. And then down the road, these problems magnified. So you get inflammatory conditions, you get memory issues, dementia, you get a fatty liver, you eventually become a diabetic, you have problems with heart problems, clogged artery, potential heart attack, and stroke. But other than that, you're doing pretty good, right? Other than the high blood pressure and the cholesterol, you're doing fine. So what I want to talk about is cause and effect. If we take all of the conditions out there that are in existence, and if we look at the common thread that goes amongst all these symptoms, both short-term and long-term, there's one thing that comes up that's so common, and that is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance. So I want to talk about that, because if you don't know about this, I would definitely pay attention, because this is the main culprit. This is the cause of all these issues. And if you understand it, you can quickly, rapidly reverse it and improve your health way, way more than anything else. Way more than taking a vitamin, way more than exercise. So it's all based on this one thing, insulin resistance. Now, what is it? Well, most people know insulin is a hormone that's made by the pancreas, and they know that it reduces blood sugars, but that's kind of where it stops. But insulin has a lot of other functions too. But typically at this point, I just want to let you know it reduces blood sugar. So if you eat sugar or carbs, your blood sugar goes up, insulin kicks in there, and it brings it down. Okay, so that's what insulin is. But what happens is the body doesn't like too much insulin, especially if you're consuming too many carbs. An average person consumes about 28 to 31 teaspoons of sugar every single day. I know. Well, normally we should only have, 1 teaspoon, but we can get that from protein and other foods. We don't need to take any sugar. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. So what happens is, as a protective mechanism, as a defense against the toxic effect of insulin and sugar, the body starts to block this insulin, starts to resist it. So what happens, it goes into the cell and then it's not received properly. So it's kind of like if you talk to someone and they're just talking too much and they won't shut up. They just go on and on and on. You're going to phase them out. But when you stop listening to them, they keep talking. They'll keep talking more and more, right? So that's what happens with insulin resistance. When that insulin, too much communication goes in the cell and it's toxic, the body blocks it, but then there's no feedback to let the pancreas know to turn off the insulin. So the pancreas makes more and more and more insulin. Okay? So that's what happens. So an average person that has insulin resistance has basically 5 to 7 times more insulin than a normal person. So this is not good. So we have the situation where we have a lot of insulin, but it's not working in the body. Not a good combination, okay? Because one of the purposes of insulin is to help fuel the cell. And if the cell is blocked and you starve the cell of fuel, it starts craving things. Okay, it starts craving and it can't do its work, it becomes weak, and it creates a lot of other issues. So what the body does is it tends to recruit sugar from other sources, like stored sugar in the liver, for example. So the body will start using up that sugar. Okay, especially the brain. The brain demands like most of the sugar in the body. It needs a certain amount of sugar. So in the blood, if there's not enough sugar, because there's a problem with insulin, because it's unavailable, the brain suffers first, and that's why people have a lot of cognitive issues. They have 2 things. One is cognitive issues, which is memory, concentration, focus issues, and then they have actual memory, going in a room they can't quite remember why they went in there, and then they have mood disorders. Okay, so their mood starts to go down. Grouchy, irritable, angry, anxiety, depression, and even anything with the head, like headaches. That's a blood sugar thing. It's a total blood sugar thing. It's insulin resistance. That's what it is. Now, in the cell, what happens is insulin lowers the sugar, and what it does, it converts it into fat. So, this is really important. So if you've checked out, just check back in right now, because this point is vital. Insulin when it lowers the sugar, it puts the excess into storage. So insulin is all about storing fat. It's a fat storing hormone. It's a dominant fat storing hormone, because in the presence of a little bit of insulin, you're going to be storing fat like crazy. Okay? So that's really what happens. So it stores sugar. It actually uses the sugar as fuel, but it also stores it as fat and cholesterol and triglycerides. So most of the cholesterol in someone's body is coming from the glucose. And then also it prevents the burning of fat. So in the presence of insulin, you're not going to burn fat. So it blocks that. So you can't lose weight. So everyone walking around with a gut, they got too much insulin. Okay? So it lowers blood sugars, it stores sugar, it makes fat, it prevents fat burning, and now it does a couple other things. It helps you absorb protein, amino acids. So without that, you start having loss of muscle mass. You have problems with wasting of cartilage and connective tissue, and ligaments and tendon problems, and loss of discs in your spine. So you start shrinking, sagging skin right here, sagging belly skin. This is inability to build muscle when you work out. It's because the cell can't pull in protein. Also, insulin has a lot to do with absorbing minerals, specifically potassium. I mean, think about if you become deficient in potassium, which most people are because we need so much, we need like almost 5 grams of it. That's 5,000 milligrams every single day. That's a lot. We need that. But to get that, you have to eat large quantities of vegetables, like 7 to 10 cups. No one does that. So on top of insulin resistance, you become so depleted of potassium, you're going to notice leg cramps. You're going to notice fatigue. You're going to notice arrhythmias in the heart. You're going to notice an inability to feel calm because potassium is a physiological relaxer, tranquilizer. It calms things down. Insulin also is like the key that unlocks the door that allows you to absorb other nutrients too, vitamins as well. So you're basically nutrient deprived. So it doesn't matter what vitamins you take, you can't pull it in. So insulin is really important, very important. Now, here's what happens. Check this out. So we start with high insulin, right? And then we go for many years as your body develops insulin resistance with normal blood sugars. So because insulin resistance is compensating for this excess and trying to help you regulate it, and it pumps out more insulin to keep the sugar down, your blood sugars stay normal. So check this out. You have high levels of insulin that then progress for years, okay? So you have insulin resistance. The body's trying to compensate for that by producing more insulin to drive in the message into the cell and try to keep things going, okay? But we have normal blood sugars for decades, okay? So now, eventually, the cell loses its power and its ability to compensate, and now it's, for some reason, stops putting out more insulin, can't compensate anymore to keep up the demand, and now the sugars start going up. Sugars go up, and that's when you get diabetes, okay? So that's the mechanism. But here's the thing, the doctors never, ever, ever test fasting insulin, because if they did, they would have caught this a long time ago. Now, in this process, some people, like myself, don't just go right to high sugar. They first go to low sugar. It's called hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. And so I just want to name off some of the symptoms, because if your adrenals are involved or your liver is unhealthy, then you're going to experience more symptoms with low blood sugars, because the adrenal in the liver helps to prevent the sugars from dropping down too low. If the sugars get too low, it starts releasing hormones like cortisol, the adrenal stress hormone, and even adrenaline, and even hormones from the liver to release a lot of stored sugar. It's called, basically it dumps the sugar from the liver to counter the low blood sugar. So if your liver or your adrenals are weak, then you're going to start seeing a lot more symptoms with low blood sugar, because you don't have the help from the adrenals to prevent low blood sugar. Okay, so hungry between meals, that's a common symptom. Definitely craving for sweets. Nervous, irritability, brain fog, tremors, shakiness, fatigue, anxiety, panic attacks, sweating, heart palpitations, confusion, cold extremities like your hands or your feet, migraines, tinnitus, schizophrenia, forgetfulness, itching, vaginal yeast infections, fainting, insomnia, crying spells, decreased libido in women, sighing frequently and yawning, and increased heart rate. And there's others as well. Those are all low blood sugar symptoms. Whereas high blood sugar symptoms increase thirst, sleep after meals, increase urination, especially at night, and the volume of glucose. Because think about it, your body's trying to dilute the sugar as a mechanism to protect you, so it actually gets rid of the glucose through peeing frequently. So your body's trying to help you, and getting thirsty to dilute the excessive sugar. That's why. Trouble concentrating, weakness, tingling, sensation, high blood pressure because the arteries get stiff, restlessness, inflammation, inflammatory conditions anywhere, frequent hunger. That's why you need to eat every hour and a half. Dry mouth, dry skin, erectile dysfunction, ear infections, kidney damage, cardiovascular, which we'll get into, peripheral neuropathy, retinal damage, that's the eye, fatty liver, stroke, heart attack, aneurysm, that's like a ballooning out of the arteries because the You start getting weakness with the wall of the vessels. Cataracts, that's the cloudiness on the lens, so it's like opaque, so you can't quite see clearly anymore. And the list goes on and on and on and on. Okay, so those are just some of the symptoms with hyperglycemia. Well, hyperinsulinemia, which is high insulin, we just covered that, but short term, high blood pressure, sodium retention, high cholesterol, high triglycerides. See, those are that's all the symptoms from metabolic syndrome. Okay, that's what causes metabolic syndrome. Brain fog, polycystic ovarian syndrome, decreased concentration, and then long-term heart attack, thickened arteries causes high blood pressure, blood clots. If it's in the heart, it's a heart attack. If it's in the brain, it's a stroke. Alzheimer's, because you get plaque in the brain, stroke, dementia, and the list goes on and on and on. So when you have high insulin or high sugar, you get styes in the eyes, you get redness underneath the eyelids, a lot of irritation. It feels like there's a foreign object in the eye that you have to rub it. It could be like feeling like a sand. I had that. Dry eyes, and the cataracts, which is the kind of the whiteness on the eye. So what happens with the cataract is you start seeing cloudiness, and then they have to do surgery, which can be totally prevented if you keep the insulin low. And then you have something called diabetic retinopathy. Now, if you think about in the back part of the eye, you have the retina. The retina is nerve tissue that extends outside the brain. Okay? So retina is basically your brain outside your brain in the eye. Okay? So it's a visible part of the inside of the eye, but it's part of the brain. It connects to the optic nerve that goes directly back into your brain. So what happens is you get damage from the high sugar with the tiny micro blood vessels that feed the nerves, the retina, okay? And you start getting floaters, you start getting edema and swelling, and you start getting stickiness and starving the nerves, and eventually you go blind. That's the leading cause of blindness in diabetics is diabetic retinopathy. Retina means disease of the retina, okay? So you get all these issues, and it's very, very common, and you start getting blurred vision. Glaucoma is also affected by high sugar, where the pressure starts increasing in the eye to the point where it starts compressing all the inside structures of the eye. So you get damage with the lens, the retina, all these other issues. You get dry eyes. I had that, okay? And the tear ducts tend to dry up, and the eyes just become very brittle, and they tear and they rip, and you get corneal erosion. Yeah, a lot of issues. Now, in the feet, the bottom of the feet, in the toes and the fingertips, you get something called peripheral neuropathy, okay, which is damaged. It's the microvascular damaged blood vessels that supply the nerve. So then the nerve dies. And so the first symptom is pins and needles, tingling, burning, pain. Then it goes to numbness. Then it goes to necrosis, which is dead and dying tissue, and we call that gangrene. And it starts spreading with the toes, so they chop off the toe, and then the foot. I mean, it's insane. Completely unnecessary. And by the way, if a person has enough nutrition in their body, and they're not deprived of nutrients, specifically the B vitamins, specifically B1, they're less likely to get peripheral neuropathy, by the way, and diabetic retinopathy. That's a side note. So nutrition does have an important part of it, but the carbs that people are eating are depleting the nutrients, okay? Now, what's happening to the eye and the feet is happening in the arteries and the inner lining of the major vessels to the heart, especially the coronary, which comes from the word crown because it's like right around the heart. What happens is you start getting damage in the endothelial cells, which is the internal lining of the arteries. You start getting lesions or breakage in those cells. So at that point, you're going to get leaking blood. And your body's going to sense that we need to do some healing. So now comes the cholesterol and the fibrin, which is the protein, and then the calcium and the white blood cells, and you have an inflammatory condition to try to heal it, and that's what forms the plaques. So cholesterol is not the bad guy. It's at the crime scene, but it didn't start the problem. It only is trying to help patch the problem. So another piece of information that most people don't understand. And then you eventually get a clot, okay, which is different than plaque. Plaque is more hard, then you can have a soft plaque and then a clot that can form. If the clot goes up to the brain, you get a stroke. If it gets stuck in the heart, you get a heart attack. Here's a picture of a microhemorrhaging of the lining of the artery. In the brain, you basically kill off your brain cells and you have atrophy of the brain. Your actual brain shrinks. Yeah. And it affects a structure in the brain called the hippocampus, which comes from the Latin word which means seahorse because it looks like a seahorse. But when you destroy the hippocampus, you start getting amnesia. That's the symptom. Memory loss. Okay? Early signs of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is really diabetes type 3. Now, let's talk about this. Because the liver is really the hub of this whole insulin resistance thing. Because what's happening is a lot of this damage is happening in the liver. Your liver is trying to cope with this, and all the extra carbs are being converted to fat around the liver first. So that's the first target that you're going to get. You're going to fill up the liver with fat, then it's going to turn into scar tissue, that's cirrhosis, which is going to be very inflamed. So you're going to get inflamed, scar tissue ridden, and fatty liver. If the person has belly fat, they have a fatty liver. Okay? So, now, I want to mention this before I get into the next part, and that is this. Normal blood sugars. When you go to the doctor, they'll check your blood sugars. It should be between like 80 and 100, but it should be better be like between 80 and 90 milligrams per deciliter. And I want to explain what that means. What that means, it's only like a teaspoon of sugar per all of the blood in the body. So you have about 1.3 gallons of blood in your entire body if you're an average person. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little less. But if you take a 165-year-old person, you have about 1.3 gallons of blood. So if you took 1 teaspoon of sugar and mixed it all through that, that's what normal blood sugar is. But an average person consumes a lot more than that, up to 31 teaspoons a day. That's like insane. So that's basically 31 teaspoons too much. Yeah. But it's hidden as breads, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, muffins, sodas, juice, and alcohol. So that's what happens. It's all hidden. People say, oh, I don't eat sugar. Yeah, but you're eating wheat and breads and things like that. So insulin resistance is a compensation to protect you against the excess sugar. If you don't change your diet, your body will then block it from going in, but then it comes with a package. And your body tries to help you only so long until finally it can't do it anymore.